Do you like what you hear? Then you need a Devon bass. Devon bass. Better by design. Whether you're old school or whether you're new school, we discuss it all for the only one that matters. Folks, today we're going to be interviewing Shaun Braley. I've never met him before. He's a friend of another interviewee, Joel Davis, and was highly recommended to me. So I have no idea what we're going to talk about, but I know that I'm going to enjoy getting to meet Shaun. He is on staff at the Grand Island Baptist Church just outside of Orlando. So let's get started and join our interview in progress. Folks, welcome to another episode of For the Only One That Matters. Today, my guest is Shaun Braley, and I know absolutely nothing about him. Kind of taking a chance, aren't we here? I might be a nutball that he doesn't know anything about. And it might be conversely the same with him. But my buddy Joel says he is worth talking to, so we're going to have fun with this. Shaun, introduce yourself to me.
Right, so my name's Shaun, and I grew up mostly in Florida and went to the Baptist College of Florida, which is where I met our mutual friend, Joel Davis. And so me and him have known each other since 99, maybe,
Wow.
2000. So we go pretty far back. And since then, I graduated with a bachelor's degree in church music from there, almost finished the music ed degree. But then I found a master's degree I liked, which was this sort of combo college, Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis, IUPUI.
Mm-hmm.
And they had a music technology degree. And so at the time, so that was early 2000s, I wasn't sure whether my full-time vocation pursuit was going to be education or ministry. So sort of preparing down the education route in case, and I enjoy learning too. So, and that was just I think a really kind of marketable degree anyway, as technology's, still
Mm-hmm.
really forming and sort of getting its feet there, especially in church world. Um, and so I've been in churches in North Carolina, Miami, Jacksonville, Florida, and let's see, and I was in Texas. I did a semester at Southwestern. I was going to work on my doctorate in music composition, and just some different life things happened, and so brought us back to Florida. And so I was at a church near Tampa, in a city called Brandon, and now I'm in a place called Grand Island Baptist Church in Florida, right above Orlando, a little bit outside of Orlando, north.
Wow. Now, I kind of like the thought that you said that you were pursuing a music composition degree. That's where I got my terminal degree was in composition. It was a residency thing, and I went back to school when I was when I was 58, and finished up when I was 60. So I was definitely one of the old dogs on the porch. They had all these kids from Berkeley and all these Wunderkinds that are from all this. Oh my gosh, such incredible musicians, and it was an incredible experience. So now you got a ed degree, and you didn't finish your composition degree, right?
Well, I didn't finish the music ed degree.
Music ed degree, gotcha.
Yeah, and then I did it's a church music degree, bachelor's of church music, and then I have master of science in music technology, and then I had just started kind of getting into the composition stuff, and then we moved out of Texas, so really never got to pursue it, and it's always been a something I've always wanted to do. I just never seem to squeeze in the time to sit there and do it. I enjoy it. The problem is I enjoy way too many things, and have 4 kids, so life keeps me busy.
Roger that. I hear that. So now, what are you doing right now?
Yeah, so I'm the associate pastor at Grand Island Baptist Church, and I lead worship. And I've had some move around duties, but currently overseeing children's ministry um, as well. We sort of uh, tore it down a bit to build it back up,
Mm-hmm.
and so that's been fun. One of the things that I seem to be drawn to in different churches is that have multiple roles, and I really enjoy expanding out just the music side of things, which is you know my bulk of my education and bulk of my experience too. I forgot to say I'm a trumpet player primarily. That's what my principal was, and I got into music playing jazz.
Mm-hmm.
And uh, one of my coolest accolades was high school making the All-State Jazz Band here in Florida, which was 1 in 4. So I was third chair out of 4. That was a really really cool experience.
Oh man, that's amazing. That's fun.
But
Isn't it cool when you get to hang out with musicians at that level?
oh goodness, yeah, yeah, and
And
probably the best
when I
band.
was in high school, band kids and choir kids, I was in band and choir. We were looked down upon being music nerds or whatever. But so when I was in choir, there'd be about 15 of us that wanted to be there, and the other 35 people were there just to get a grade so they could graduate. But when you go to places like Allstate, everybody in the room is as jacked up about music as you are. And that was one thing that I loved so much when I got my degree at Vermont College of Fine Arts. I remember being in the lunchroom and I made some really obscure joke about Bach, and somebody clear across the room chuckled because they got it. I'm going, oh my God, I'm in a room full of people that like all this stuff, and
Yeah,
it's a rush. It's good. It's cool. Well, so you're handling the worship now. Are you leading the worship, or are you directing it?
yeah, I lead it. Yeah,
Okay.
so yeah, it's sort of an interesting journey for me because I'm a very just sort of mediocre singer.
Uh-huh.
There's nothing special about my singing ability. I mean, my primary skill set has always been in instruments and
Mm-hmm.
in primary orchestra instruments. So I can play most of the brass instruments.
Mm-hmm.
I'll play piano in public and bass and maybe drums, but other than that, so yeah, so I lead worship.
So no interpretive dancing.
No, Baptist church, dude.
As long as you
So,
leave one foot on the ground, both feet don't come off at the same time, you should be good, right?
man, if I'm lucky in any of the churches I've ever been, just to get them to clap at the right time, that but
No,
that's
two,
we're
two and four, two and
we're
four.
yeah, we're so far away from dancing. It's just I'll be happy they can clap right.
Well, that is awesome. Well, what I've been doing generally with these podcasts is I've been focusing on worship leaders across the country, and I asked them the basic same spade of questions. One being, if you were to give a State of the Union address on the state of worship music in the church today, what would you say? That was question number one. Question number two would be, do you weigh in on the hymn versus worship chorus thing? And has that been an issue? It's I've got some really good responses on that. In fact, some responses have really surprised me. So I'll be interested in your take on that. And another question. This sounds really kind of stupid, but somebody actually asked me this the other day, and I started laughing till I realized they were serious. They said, "Why do we turn the lights down inside church during worship service?" And I started laughing because I thought they were being funny, but they weren't. They were serious. And so maybe we can talk. Maybe we can throw some light on that, on a subject like that. Basically, what is the worship atmosphere you find most conducive to actual worship? So let's start with the first one: state of the worship union address. How are we doing?
Yeah, well, what's crazy is, of course, we live in a time where there's, information is accessible like unlike any other time in history, and
Mm-hmm.
so we have exposure to cultures and styles and stuff unlike any other time in history.
Right.
And so like I like to explain like the difficulty of leading a multicultural, multi-generational service is that you have, somewhat, slight to significant cultural changes, say in music, almost every 10 years throughout the 20th century.
Right.
And then so you get a person who's, 80 years old, they've lived through, you know, 5 to 6, small to significant changes throughout their life. And then you talk about church, it doesn't really, unless you're sort of more, you grew up in California or in a city or anything, church music was almost always the same in whatever area you were in, until, probably the 80s.
Right.
When it began to expand out in different ways. And so I think all of us are just trying to figure out, how to keep everybody focused on what really matters, and to do that in a way that everybody can connect with, and in a way that's meaningful to them and attainable by them. So it's, most of my experience has been in blended type churches. They always want to go, well, we want to do blended worship. So at, one church, see two no, one church I did was strict contemporary, and then we had a straight traditional service, and there was three
Hmm.
services at that church. And then I I was at a church plant for a year, and that was straight contemporary. So that was a few years ago. I did that, and then most of the other churches have been like First Baptist, this Baptist, and that Baptist, and they're in that kind of in that place of, well, we know that music is changing around us, and what we always grew up singing and loving isn't really connecting with the younger people or even unchurched people.
Hmm.
So we have to start to change. But what's the smallest or the most comfortable change that we can make?
Yeah.
And
Smallest
that's
incremental change.
yeah, and so that's the blended thing, and that's changed a lot from when I first started, leading worship. I don't know, around 2000 maybe, I don't remember, but um, where the blended was just singing choruses, those
Hmm.
little, this is the day, or what is it? What a mighty God we serve,
Yeah.
those kinds of things, or like Lord, I let your name on high came
Oh my
out,
God.
and it
Can you
was like,
believe that is a classic oldie now? I remember
right.
when that first came out. My word. Hmm.
Yeah, the oldie stations on the radio now are like 80s.
I
And I'm like,
know.
wait a minute, like that's my time. That's when I grew up. It's like, wow, that's
I
old.
grew up,
But
the contemporary music of the day when I was in worship ministry was the Gaithers, all right, the Bill and Gloria
yeah.
Gaither, and Don Francisco, and second chapter of Acts. And, it's like,
Ah, yeah,
yeah, hear the
Francisco.
bells ringing, they're singing, we can be born again. I love that song. And now, when I bring up those songs I teach privately, I bring some of those songs up to my kids. They're looking at me and says, "Wow, that's old music." I went,
Yeah.
"No, Wesleyan hymns are old music." Wait a minute,
Yeah.
this is old music because it's 40 years ago. It's 50 years old. Holy mackerel!
Yeah.
Well, now, how do you? Uh, um, so in the church right now, where you're doing blended, are you doing both kinds of music in one service, or do you have a service set aside for one, service set aside for the other?
So the pastor and I have a sort of a common philosophy of church in a lot of ways. And I think that's one of the things that's important, for anybody uh, going into ministry or trying to fix their next spot, is they often don't think of, philosophy of ministry compatibility.
Mm,
I have found at this stage in life, like that's one of the most important things, because it can become one of the most frustrating things to be in a church where the other pastoral staff don't really think about you and matters that you think are important.
right.
And so definitely something to be important about. But so we've come to we both have come to sort of in our time of study just to the idea of the one congregation, the one meeting. So at our church at this point, we would never do multiple services or satellite campuses or
Right.
anything like that. We would just be the one gathering. So we do that. We have a band and a praise team. So we had a choir before COVID, and
Hmm.
then COVID killed, all kinds of things and helped, I think, all kinds of things too, for churches. But so there just hasn't been enough interest in choir to come back here. So we use about four or five, sometimes but not often six other singers, and then we have bass guitar, uh, acoustic guitar, drums, piano, keys, and sometimes when we have everybody, we have a keytar as well playing because we don't have like an electric player.
Right.
So I bought a keytar one day because it was always my dream to have one, and because
Yeah, you're a musician. You got to have just one. How many toys will it take to make you happy, honey? Just one more.
yeah. So every time I picked up a guitar, I would push, I'd be like, "Ow, my fingers hurt." And it's like just got to build up calluses, and I'm like, "Man, I can play piano. I don't need to do this." So so anyway, that's my sort of like, to be able to put any sound on there, and just kind of jam out. But so we have a guy that plays that too, when we move around. It's sort of like just playing like lead parts. And so we'll do, you know we don't really dumb down very much of the songs, but I'm very particular to pick nothing that's too edgy,
Hmm.
most of the time. So in our congregation, very multi generational. Um, and so if we got into anything that was too high or too rhythmically syncopated or tricky, it would just take forever for them to learn it. So
Right.
I kind of stay in the zone of singable songs, which I think is important.
Well, it's
Um,
with my students that I teach, and I teach mostly students. A lot of my students have gone on to become worship leaders and worship pastors in a couple of cases. Um, what we would talk about was initially the discussion would be Christian. Christian music is so easy. It's there's nothing challenging, and I would come back at them with, you can find a challenge at anything. I said, but let's stop and think about a minute. Would you say Christian music is pop music? And they say, well, yeah, to the contemporary stuff. We're mirroring a lot of what's going on in the pop world. And I said, where does that word pop come from? They'd say, well, it's popular. I said, okay, why is a song popular? Because it's easy to listen to. Mm-hmm. And when a successful pop song is written, even if the audience has never heard it, they get a sense that they know what's coming next. They know that a chorus is coming up. They know that we're going to go back to the verse. They hear the 5-to-1 thing, even though musicians like you, me, know what that means. The average listener doesn't, but they hear that and they go, oh, we're coming back to the beginning. So pop's music job, in order to sell records, is to be an easy listen to the masses. I said, now, when you're in church, do you want them spending that 30 minutes trying to figure out how to sing a song in 7/8? Or just because it's cool and it's fancy and you come up with this really cool little riff, and it makes it impossible for them to clap on 2 and 4? I said, Christian music has always been simple in the sense that it's got to be easy for our folks to sing. And they've got to be able to lock into it. If it's a new song, they got to be able to lock into it quickly so we can get to the meat of the message of that song, whatever it is. And so I said, now the challenge for you as a player is, how do you play that so well that they worship and kind of forget that you're on the stage? To me, that's been the biggest challenge as a Christian musician and a church musician, has been to overcome the desire to be the show, to be the center. I'm a guitar player and a bass player. Dude, we are so used to being the show.
yeah.
And in church, that I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges with my students. Um, so I like. So you when you talk about an edgy song, like what kind of song are you talking about?
What kind of song am I talking
Yeah.
about? Gosh, I don't know. I don't.
Would
I
it
don't
be?
listen enough.
Is it? Yeah, you probably, because you're only listening to the
What
good
am
stuff. You got to go out and listen to some trash, preacher. Uh,
Yeah, I mean, there's those things that like what's his name was doing, the guy out of Joel Osteen's church. What was that guy's name?
oh, Okay.
He
You
had
don't have to go any
stuff that
further. I know
he had
exactly
some
what he's talking.
stuff he had some stuff that was like popular a while ago, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's like that "Lord, You Are Good" song.
Yeah.
So stuff that really pushes. There's a really cool arrangement of "Victory in Jesus" that Travis Cottrell does,
Mm-hmm.
and it's really driving, right? It just drives real hard. And so, I would say, anything edgy might really be musically talking about anything where the rhythm is is overtly driving everything,
Right.
So,
Well, it's like songs
really
like
strong
that.
guitars.
Those are performance pieces, not necessarily perhaps, a good performance song doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a great worship song.
Right.
So,
Yeah, and like you were saying too, like I think one of the tricks is we want to do cool things, like especially guitar players, we get the cool, solo section in the song, like even some worship songs, we'll have that. It's like usually we don't do that
mhm.
because that stuff can then become distracting from what we're really trying to do.
Yep.
And so that is that trick of balance again, and knowing your people too, really. Because I'm sure there are some congregations where, a little guitar solo in something isn't going to pull them away,
Right. I'm going to show you
from.
something here that I'm finally, after I'm 67 years old, I'm finally going to go do. Let's see if I can pull this off here. All right. No audio. There we go. Got it. All right. And now I got to switch my camera around. Oh, there we go. A Line 6 Helix. Have you heard of this piece
Okay,
of gear?
I don't know, but it looks like a foot pedal, huh?
It's an amp emulator. It can and they make patches that you can download from the artists that you want to
Oh,
emulate that
that's
you
like.
so and they have there's communities out there, worship communities, where they have patches for this, for the songs, the songs that we like to do in churches. So you just load that
Huh.
patch down here, and all of a sudden you're doing just whatever the latest and greatest guy is doing. And I've resisted this for years, and mainly because I'm a bit of a purist in the sense that I don't feel the need to imitate what exactly what's on an album. But I have to admit, the sounds in this thing are really cool. If you're any kind of a techno gadget guy,
Yeah.
dude, you can do anything you want with this.
Yeah, that's cool. And digital, I mean, digital has brought so much, possibility into music. It's insane, all the things. So not surprised you can do that, but I've never heard of that. That's really
There's
pretty
two
cool.
big boys out in the block right now: the Line 6 Helix, this, and another piece of gear called the Kemper. Now you can use them for bass, for guitar, and it's since more and more instrumentalists are running through the front of the house and not using onstage amplification anymore. Well, then you just run to the house out of this, and everybody's got headphones on and they listen that way. But you can. I bet I had a pedal board that had $1,000 worth of guitar pedals on it, and it was getting to the point where it looked like I was dancing across hot coals.
Yeah.
Because so with this, I can just hit one button and then it's all done. You can even program this thing for different sections of a song. So if I'm doing a worship tune, button 1 will be the verse, button 2 will be the chorus, button 3 will be the bridge of that song. I mean, you can get so ridiculous with it, and I'm trying really hard to be offended by all that, but I'm not. It's fun. There's
Yeah.
lights and it flashes and it blinks at me, and I look and I feel like I'm flying a 747 or something. Well, now, one of the things that Joel and I talked about, and my son and I talked about, was styles of worship. My son is a Presbyterian, Reformed Presbyterian minister of music, also an elementary school music teacher. And I spoke with him about this, and then I also spoke yesterday with a gentleman who is the black minister of music at a black Episcopalian church in Atlanta. Cool church, and oh my word! And we talked about what's acceptable in a worship service, and my son had a really interesting viewpoint. Now you say you have children, right?
Yep.
How old are they?
6 to 17.
Well, my son is going to be like 43, and when they
That's
when they
about where
grow
I
when they grow up, you are going to be so blessed because they're going to turn on you and they're going to say some of the wisest things, and you're wondering where in the what gene did that come from? Because I'm pretty sure there's no genetic material on my side of the family that produced something that smart. But he and I were talking, and I asked him the question: is there anything, worship practice that you find unacceptable? And he said, Dad, it's not about good or bad. It's about culture. And I asked him to explain. He said, I watched a worship service in a church in Africa where they were pogoing up and down and waving their hands and worshiping and singing spontaneously and pogoing up and down. He says, and you can't help but be overwhelmed with the just unbridled joy of that congregation. But he said, man, if I were to try to get my Presbyterians to do that, they'd run me out of town on a rail. And he says, it's not that it's bad. It's not even that it's good. It's just their culture. That's how they express themselves. So he said, and he said, Pentecostals, Baptists, Methodists, everybody has a culture. And as a worship pastor, you have to interpret the culture that you're put in and respect that. And there's learning that can take place. I mean, you can move your people into freer and freer modes of worship. But he said, just because you saw something cool in Africa doesn't mean it's going to work in Dubuque, Iowa. And so to him, worship is all about culture. So in his Presbyterian church, guess what? There's a lot of organ stuff. There's a lot of piano stuff. He's bringing newer songs in. But he says, at the end of the day, Dad, when people leave this church service, did they worship? That's the only question you got to ask. Not, did you teach them a cool song? Not, did you manage to tick somebody off because you made them pogo in the front row? Whatever. And so I'd be interested to get your input on that subject about how you grow your congregation. You have a vision for worship. I'm sure you and your pastor do, of how the worship service should be and what should be happening in it. How do you move your people in that direction without causing
yeah.
wholesale riots?
Right. So for me, the central idea of worship and everything is when Jesus, confronts the woman at the well, right? And she, they had that
Yes.
conversation, and she asked the question where, you know, you say we should worship here, and Samaritans say we should worship there, and he goes, you know, says the thing, those who worship will worship the Father in spirit and in truth,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so that's the key thing to me right there. Spirit being, and I guess, different people, depending on which, commentary you're reading or whatever, that it could be the Holy Spirit, worshiping in the Holy Spirit, or the Spirit, the inner man, with the inner man, which, I tend to lean towards that, that we're meant to worship with all of our being,
Yes.
heart, soul, mind, and strength. And then in truth. And so that's it. That's what anything has to come down to that you're doing it in spirit, and that you're doing it in truth. All the other stuff is just a matter of I agree, culture. And the interesting thing is, there's not only is there culture where you live, like say Africa, or rural America, or or European cities and stuff. There's also church culture. And so what I've been experiencing is, obviously our culture has shifted a lot, especially in the way that popular music is, but church culture has been lagging way behind. And so you get people who are used to they may listen to the radio to different music, but when they come to church, they expect church music to be, you know, piano and organ or something. They don't
Mm-hmm.
expect it to sound like the music that they listen to. So the dual challenge is, not only are you connecting with people that's culturally relevant, but also that is relevant to the church cultures that they grown up in. So in our congregation, we have people that have come out of Catholicism or other denominations, or didn't grow up in the church at all, or grew up Baptist all their life. And so all kinds of things. Like I'm surprised. There's a song, "Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing,"
Mm-hmm.
right? Before I got here, the pastor was telling me that they sang that one time, and like tons of people didn't know it. And I'm like, how do you know? How do you not know
Yeah, I know.
"Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing"? And so from time to time, I was surprised what people don't know, because even though they've grown up maybe in a church tradition, their tradition did not sing that song often.
Right.
And so, so they didn't know it. And so the challenge is thinking about, where everybody's come from, what will musically connect to them, what will help them to engage with their whole being, right?
Mm-hmm.
What will connect to their heart, connect to their minds, what will help them to sing, and is it true? Is what we're doing true? Is the music that we're doing, is it distracting, or is it helping for
Mm-hmm.
everybody to do that, to participate in spirit and in truth? And so that's sort of where I land, and that's different from place to place. You mentioned Africa. My sister-in-law, so my wife's sister, is went over to Africa on a mission trip one time, met a local pastor there, that was doing the orphanage, and they sort of Facebook romanced, and they ended up getting married. And so now she's over there with him in Uganda, and they're doing amazing things. Oh, super, super amazing things. He'd be a cool guy to talk to, if you're interested in that.
Oh,
But
yeah.
he put up a video, of, I think he's in Somalia or Rwanda, and they're doing some kind of like revival meetings over there. He put up a
Mm-hmm.
little video of them, and it was exactly that, right? Dancing around, singing, clapping, and it's just cool, and it's just a good reminder that we may go, oh, I could never do that. That's okay. Spirit and truth is what matters, in all
It's
this.
what's interesting to me is that I've started when the pandemic started. I had to go completely virtual in everything I did. I'm a music teacher, private music teacher. Well, couldn't do lessons for like 2 years. I got a heart condition. I got diagnosed with congestive heart failure, and they got pills that take care of that stuff now. It's no big deal. I'm going to last forever. But uh, I had to change everything I did. I had to go totally virtual, and in the process, I realized there's a lot of technology I didn't know. So just as a tool to help me learn technology, I started doing a podcast of me doing a Bible devotion every day, and I would just take a chapter and I would read through it, and I would do what I call thinking with my mouth open. That's what I do. I think with my mouth open a lot. I'm very verbal that way. When I solve problems, I just got to start speaking stuff, and things get in order after a while. And I was modeling that off of that passage. I think it's Psalms 1 says, "Blessed is a man who doesn't walk in the ways of the wicked, sit in the seat of scorners, scoffers." Oh, I'm going to go back and remember it. But he said but his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in it he meditates day and night, and everything he does prospers, basically. Well, that word meditate means to talk to yourself, to mutter out loud. And I'm starting to think, well, that's what I'll do. So just to learn the technology, because I had to learn how Facebook Live worked. I had to get cameras. I had to get, oh, good Lord. It was, for someone who used to be so technically literate, I am just an absolute Cro-Magnon now when it comes to technology. But so I started doing this to get the technology set up. And I discovered something really incredible. Bible devotions are really important. I know
Yeah.
you'd think, gosh, son, you've been a Christian for 50 some years and you're just now figuring that out. But I started doing these devotions. And one of the things was that passage there where he's talking to the Samaritan woman and talking in spirit and in truth. It's like the original plan that God had for Israel was not to be segregated off from the rest of the world. They were to be the light on the hill. There was always a place at God's table for Gentiles. They weren't supposed to exclude Gentiles. That's why Jesus got upset, I think, in the courtyard with the whips and tipping tables and stuff, because they set up in the place that Gentiles were supposed to come and listen to the word of God. So so when you're worshiping in spirit and in truth, there's supposed to be an air of inclusiveness, and we tend to continually replicate that particular sin of Israel by segregating ourselves off. We don't hang with Catholics. We don't hang with Methodists. We don't. Denominationalism is great in the sense that it's almost always based on a resurgence of a truth that has been neglected. But then eventually it seems like it just falls apart and gets to the point where you're just putting more walls up between you and another group of Christians that you're not going to hang with. And so worship seems to be the thing that breaks that down. I've discovered as a worship leader and as a worship player for lots of years, when people sing together, things just don't seem so stark. And I'm very much enthralled with seeing what happens in a congregation in the process of a worship service. I was in a church once that went through a horrible church split. It was ugly. It was the ugliest thing on the planet. The denomination sent in a new pastor to make peace and draw, and this guy was able to get both factions together into the same sanctuary. Now, they sat on this side, and these guys sat on that side. And they wouldn't even look at each other. There was so much anger and angst. But in the midst of a worship service, you started seeing people break down and crying and weeping, hugging the necks of people that they had been estranged from or that they had walked away from. And that was in a room where all the lights were up. It wasn't dark. There wasn't a lot of production. It was a couple guitars, 2 or 3 voices, and a piano. And I saw God's Spirit move in such a powerful way to unite that body. And so what my son said and what you said really resonates with me. The fact that there's not one way of doing it. The only way you have to be faithful to who you are, to your culture, to where you are, to your people, in order to pull this off. And it's a dance. I thought God was calling me to be a worship leader, a worship pastor once. I am so glad he did not. I do not want your job. I've done it enough to know that my spiritual gifts are teaching, administration, prophecy, but in the spiritual gifts arena, mercy is 2% for me. I had a pastor tell me once, you'll never be a worship pastor because nobody would survive your rehearsals. And he's right. So how do you, what's that?
I said, well, maybe. I mean, we all grow, right?
Yeah.
I mean, being merciful is a Christian trait, not
Yes.
just a.
I'm much more merciful now than I was. I will say that.
Yeah, we grow in that. And so, but definitely some people, I mean, I've heard stories, from other places of, choir directors who, there was one place, they'd say the choir director would yell at them all the time and belittle them. And I was like, and for some reason they still liked them. I mean, that was the thing. That was like, I really did. The man, they had to get to mercy collectively, I think. But definitely, I mean, we grow, and I think God definitely puts us in places where we can help the kingdom the best, and definitely.
Well, I have mercy when it comes to, and this is really funny. When I started teaching guitar back 2001, I didn't think I would do it very long because I didn't like kids. I like my own kids well enough, but your kids, not so much. So, but I discovered that I have a real sweet spot and a ton of mercy for the middle school, high school age group. And I click with them. I have bucket loads of mercy, but whiny adults send me around the corner. Now I'm gracious enough. I don't snap on them, but I know enough now not to just put myself in a position where I'm going to be bugged by whiny adults. And it took me so long to realize that not everybody has the time to be a vocational musician like we are. And that this is a very much a part-time thing for them. And sometimes it's all they can do to show up on Wednesday. No, they're not prepared, but they came because they wanted to sing. And for some reason or another, I never lock into that in a rehearsal situation. So I think it's wisdom that God not unleash me in the body of Christ in a worship pastor situation. I'm working with the kids. I'm good with that.
Yeah.
Now, what do you use to classify as an acceptable worship song? Or better yet, it's kind of a takeoff on what we talked about earlier. What would you classify as not a good song for worship?
Well, it would just be the opposite of what I would say is a good song. So, number one, the thing I always look at when I'm looking at new music is the lyrics,
Hmm.
right? Because it needs to be true. So, no matter what happens, it needs to be true. It needs to be in a language that be using language that is familiar with your people. So, that's one of the things I think why some, hymns have moved themselves out of the mainstream usage because the archaic, sort of language, they're not used to doing it,
Hmm.
and or new people aren't, and or whatever, and they can't connect with it. So the first thing I look at is lyrics. The second thing I look for is it singable, right? So most of the people are not, tenors in your
Yeah.
church. And so the crazy thing about a lot of music that's performed now, I'll say the way when it's performed, and usually when they compile it or whatever, or you go to, CCLI Song Select or something, and they, the regular key for it is the key that the performance is in or something. And it's usually for those guys who are tenors, and when you sing those, like the sopranos, they're like, I can't sing that high, and they have to sing it down an octave, just to get that high. And then most of your guys can't even sing that high.
Yeah. Well,
And so,
Chris, was it? Some of those guys I swear, are mutants. I remember when Chris, what's his last name?
Chris
Really big
Tomlin,
guy. Yeah, Tomlin. When he did like Lord, I Lift Your Name on High 18 bazillion years ago, he sings it in E flat. And I'm going, what? That's, and it's fine until you get to the, you came from heaven to earth.
yeah,
And it's like, and no, dude, G, take it to G and take me home. But it's, yeah, so
yeah,
I guess that gets back to the point where it's being a good performance doesn't necessarily make it a good worship thing. You have to adapt it or change it somehow.
yeah. Yeah, and so almost everything that we do that's contemporary is in a lower key than whatever it's recorded in. Like we've done some Shane and Shane stuff recently, and their music is really cool. They do some really cool musical things, I think, with some songs. Um, and but they're just high, and then the harmony guy, he's even higher. So it's crazy. It's sick to listen to those guys and just at their musicianship. They're just really good musicians. Uh, and then, but we can't sing in that key. It'd be crazy. Um, and so everything we do has to come down. So, I'm looking at singability, which is not just the melody. Is it jumping too much? Is it weird intervals? Is the rhythm challenging to pick up? Things like that. And then is the music good? And then that's really the lesson. Is it good music?
Hmm.
um, because there's a lot of songs that have been written in the time of Christian history, which have very poor lyrics, and they die. People stop singing them. Um, that I think that's other than our culture, it just shifts and changes and moves on to the next thing so fast, so much. But it's easy to do when something isn't, uh, lasting. The
Right.
lyrics aren't universally lasting. Um,
Well,
or
I used to teach a class in songwriting to high school kids, and I told them, Christian kids, and I said, look, 90% of what you're going to write, or maybe even more, will never be meant for mass consumption. And they said, what do you mean? I said, God speaks to musicians, and music is our self-therapy. We write, we experience something, a situation, a death, or, something traumatic, and somehow it finds its way out in a song. And most of the time for me, most of those songs are songs that I wrote to deal with something I was going through at the time. And yeah, other people go through that, but that's just like private time with me and God. It's really not meant for public consumption. I sometimes think that pop artists just launch themselves at mediocre lyrics and unimaginative chord changes so they can sell an album. And Christian artists sometimes we make the mistake of thinking that every song that God has put into us is meant for everybody else to hear. Sometimes that's private worship time between us and God. And I don't really know how to determine where that song, whether a song is that or the other, except perhaps like what you just said, some songs die because they just don't catch on. And
Yeah.
some songs I don't think are meant to catch on.
Yeah, and we've sang some new songs before in all the places that I've ever been, and they don't, they just never seem to capture the people, even though it may fit my criteria of being true and good lyrics and then being singable and being good music. For some reason, it just isn't connecting with them. And so, I just put it on the shelf.
Yep.
And then other ones, they seem to keep going and they seem to get even deeper and deeper the more that we sing it, uh,
Yes.
connected to people.
At our church, we just had our music minister leave, go to another church. He'd been at our church for like 25, 30 years, and we loved him. This guy was, but he's old school, and it was wonderful. This was like a big Baptist church, big choir, big orchestra, all that kind of stuff. And they brought in a skinny jean wearing, faux hawk wearing young worship leader. And my first impression of him was that, oh, great. And because, the skinny jean era is coming on, and me and skinny jeans, dude, I'm 15 pounds of potatoes in a 10-pound sack when it comes to that stuff. And, but it turns out that Kerry is old school all the way. And he brings in what he's been doing. He's been bringing in the hymns, but he's been encapsulating them in a more modern arrangements. And so he's kept the hymns that everybody loves, and he's put them in a style that is really indicative of a lot of what's happening musically, contemporary wise. And we have a upstairs service and downstairs. We call it a classic and a modern service. But the classic service isn't just hymns. It's this is where I felt old the other day. We did some Gaithers tunes and some old Keith Green tunes. And I'm thinking to myself, why is this in a classic service? Then I went, because it's 50 years old?
Yeah.
Holy crud. I just look for a chair to sit down, because all of a sudden it made me realize how much I've lived through when it comes to music and the eras. I mean, I became a Christian in the mid 70s. So second chapter of Acts, Keith Green, the Imperials, early Imperials, Don Francisco, so many of these artists, and now then I've come through the hip hop Christian era, and now we're into what I call the U2 era. Because U2's got a really cool ethereal sound, and so we're kind of like, I went through all these settings for all these patches that I've downloaded for the worship community, and every one of them sounds like the Edge. You're playing like Edge playing U2 tunes. So I'm thinking, oh, we're in the U2 era now. I wonder what's going to come next. I mean, they've got everything so encapsulated now. Well, I guess the next thing is stems. Do you guys use those at your church?
No.
That seems to be very much happening, where they'll actually have the stems from the album, and they'll include whatever stems that the band can't cover. Whatever parts the band can't cover, they bring the stems, and we play to a click track. And part of me sad.
What I did do at our church plant, because that wouldn't be conducive to the sound that we're making in most of the blended sort of situations that I was in. But what I did do when I was at the church plant, we were doing just straight up contemporary.
Mm-hmm.
Was I would download the Reason tracks. So, are you familiar with Reason?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I am.
The sequencing software. So I download the Reason tracks, and then I could take out whatever we had in it, and then play it from there. And then there actually were times where I had Joel, where I wasn't going to have a guitar player, and I would have Joel like, hey, just here's the track, play along with it for me, so I can have a guitar track on there for this tune that we're going to do. and then I'd just do that. And I liked it because you could put a loop on a section, and so if there was a section like I might want to repeat this chorus,
Hmm.
I could live adjust that. Whether if you just have a track, you're basically limited to the track.
Yes.
And so it was nice to have sort of that freedom to jump to a thing. And then of course, because we hooked it through a keyboard too, and that's what we use with the keytar is I just use Reason as the synth for it. Um, we could just play along with that. So really, that's the only time I've ever done anything. But then other going to the purist thing,
Hmm.
and also just the just that those are just sounds that are necessary for what we're trying to do. But yeah, but I know a lot of guys. I mean, I know there was this one like app at some point or something that was like playing fifth chords or something, and it would
Hmm.
match or something, and it would just add another layer of something there. And I was like, just,
Yeah.
but what that's not me. But if you want to do it and your people are connected to that, man, have at
Again,
it.
it comes down to culture. If that really connects with your folks, yeah. And Kerry is pulling it off in a rather spectacular way. He has a big time contemporary service downstairs, and upstairs it's a more intimate uh, classic service. And I play the classic service because I just love those old hymns. It's like I turned 60. All of a sudden, I like football on Sundays and old hymns. And I have no idea why that happened. I was a rock and roller until I turned 60. Now, all of a sudden, I want all those Wesleyan hymns and those old Baptist hymns of yore. Don't know why that is. One last thing. What do you expect to see in a Christian musician at your church, skill set wise? What does a church musician need to be successful at your church?
Well, Psalm 33:3 says, "Sing to the Lord a new song, shout for play skillfully and shout for joy." All right.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a key thing in there to play skillfully, right? And so obviously you're sort of you've got what you've got. Whatever's in the pot is in the pot,
Right.
and so you're only going to be able to do whatever that the skill level of that person is.
Right.
But we're meant to do it well. So I think the Bible, for us, not only because God's worth the effort to do something well, but that's just one thing that I think biblically too. You just got that idea, play skillfully. And then number one, the number one factor, if you're going to be on the stage, you're going to be a member of the church, and that's because you're in front of everybody. Number one, um, and that's going to have some implications in either distraction for the people,
Mm-hmm.
um, or anything like that. I know there's been, and this is just where I am, and it's there will be lost people. Like I was in a church one time where the guy was there was a choir member who was kind of like upset at me because I wasn't going to let a non-member sing in the choir or something. He was like, when I was in youth choir, I wasn't even saved, and I was there
Mm-hmm.
singing, and and it was that experience that helped bring me to Christ. And I'm like, that's cool, man. God can bring that in all kinds of ways, but worship only makes sense to me when it's God's people doing it. And so that's why I'm not really a big buyer into of we got to shape our services for the sake of the lost people because it's a saved people activity. All right,
Yes.
what we do is a saved people activity, and so that's where it has to start. Not
I was never a fan of the seeker sensitive thing
yeah,
where you design a church service around the non believers. The truth
yeah,
is, it's us.
yeah. So number one, we want to be a member. So here at our church, you go through there's an interview so we can get to know you. You can kind of get to know us a little bit when you want to become a member. So that way, number one, we're not putting unregenerate people, and treating them as though they are. Because
Yes.
in the old days of revivalism and stuff, it's just, oh, just come on up and we'll baptize you, and then just keep coming which
Yeah.
is I think one of the frustrations of the modern church is that we haven't done discipleship very well. I'm sure if you talk to Joel in any length, I know that's a common, thing we share, a
Mm-hmm.
strong desire for to see better discipleship in our churches. But uh, so gives us a chance to figure out that because, especially if you're going to put a person on the stage, you want to know that that they are actually worshiping,
Right.
that they actually are saved. They can actually worship in spirit and in truth. And
Yes.
so, we look for that first, and then really it's just heart and effort. I haven't had the luxury of living near Nashville. I've got a friend who lives near Nashville. So he has a he I've never had the luxury of having to choose between a lot of part-time professional musicians.
Right.
And so it's just, what have we got, and what can we make good music that helps the people to worship,
Mm-hmm.
with. So it's, are you skilled enough to do what we're trying to do? Um, are you saved? Are you trying to grow in the Lord? Um, and do you have a heart to continue to grow and to do that? So
So you're in favor of the homegrown as opposed to the hired gun approach, where
well,
you hire musicians in.
so I'm not opposed to that, but it would still have to fit sort of that criteria, right? Um,
They have to be believers.
well, yeah, absolutely, believers. I would never, unless it was some kind of thing outside of um, the context of the normal gathering for worship.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, that I would never, you know, today, never hire, an unbeliever to come and to play this or that. If it's a special event, like if we're doing like a big something, and I want a string quartet or whatever. Here's a good example. When I was in Texas, we did I was going and sitting in with the band at the community college, their local community college, and so I was getting to know them some. And as we were getting towards Christmas, I had this idea, man, we should do Rudder's Gloria with. And I don't know if are you familiar with
Mm-hmm.
Rudder's
Oh
Gloria?
yeah.
Oh, it's such an amazing piece, and I love it. And as a trumpet player and a lover of organ music too,
Mm-hmm.
um, uh, that it'd be fun. And so we actually paid an organist to come in and to do that, and we got together with that community college and the like local community choir. We
Mm-hmm.
just did a big concert. So our choir did some songs, and then the other choirs did some songs, and then we all did the Rudder Gloria together. And so I would have no problem, so that was an event. It was in our church. It had a lot of spiritual overtones to it,
Mm-hmm.
but it was really more like a concert, in a way of trying to connect with the community and to preach the gospel, to people who may not would come to the church just to hear our choir sing.
Right.
Uh, so so in situations like that, yeah, I have no there'd be there'd be no issue with bringing stuff like that. But in the week to week worship routine, yeah,
It's
I,
funny.
I would
The
certainly
story
pay.
came to me of Handel when he had written Messiah, and he was getting ready to perform it publicly, maybe for the first time. The soprano that was going to be singing for him was not a believer, and from what I understand, she had questionable morals, and she was a playa, and he was chastised for that. Why are you having that lady sing this song? He said, well, first of all, she can sing this song. And then he said, second of all, he says, where else is she going to hear what she's going to hear here? Because, it's the life of Christ. Messiah's life of Christ. And he said, where else is she going to hear this gospel? She won't come to your church. And so he was not opposed to bringing in for special performances folks like that. And
Yeah.
which I thought was fascinating because I'm on the same side of the fence as you are. When you're leading worship, um, God has a dim view of people who don't belong there. You take a look at what happened at the tabernacle when Aaron's sons offered strange fire, they got popped. When they're bringing back the Ark of the Covenant improperly with David and the servants, and the one guy they reached out to keep the cart from falling on the ground, he got zapped because they were doing it wrong. They were doing it improperly. They were not doing it according to God's instructions. And in the worship service, I'm with you on that. But I still look at Handel, that story about Handel, and I'm going, I can't really argue with that either.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's certainly an inner desire for all of us that I think comes from God to see people saved.
Right.
And it's easy for us to go. I mean, that's the whole secret thing came to that, right? It's just
Mm-hmm.
like, man, we just want to see people saved, so we're going to do as much as we can to make them feel like this is a place for them. When the reality is, it could be a place for them, but it's really a place for God's people. And
Yes.
and so yeah, it's. I mean, I think there are. I definitely, it's. I don't feel good and saying, ever a lost person, rah, 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 with the
Yeah.
Jesus stuff, because yeah, because of that. But when I read the Bible, that just makes the most sense to me. And God's saving power. I don't have to be tricky um, or try to open doors that God is not opening for a
Right.
person to become saved. God sets the boundaries. God sets the rules. He sets the way things are meant to be. We follow that, and we trust that that's going to be, good enough to accomplish what God wants to do. And
Yes.
that's when we get in trouble. Is when we start to step out of those things.
Mm-hmm.
And like a lot of churches, like the one thing that's always funny to me, and I think I've had this in every stuff, is like, well, I know we got to start singing more newer songs for the younger people. Like, eh,
Uh,
that no, you can
no.
still keep singing, and the younger people could come and adapt or whatever, but it's not like here's their thing. And oh, this is a funny story. I don't know how long you're for time, and of course you said you can edit whatever you want to, but
Yeah.
um I had this really interesting experience. So I guess this might have been around 2008, 2010 or something, when I was in Jacksonville, and this senior adult choir was going to come to our church and perform. And the guy who leads it came over to the church, and we were talking some and about where they were going to set up, just the nuts and bolts of what's going to happen when they come. And he sits down at the piano and starts playing, sort of a ragtimey old Southern gospel like kind of thing. He's like,
Mm-hmm.
"Oh man, you got a really good piano." And I'm like, yeah, yeah, yeah. And so we got talking about where he goes to church, and I knew that it was a very contemporary church, and that this here was an older guy leading a senior choir. And it's like, man, I'm really interested to know like why, like how you're adapting at the church that's moved to contemporary. Um, and he goes, oh, when they sing those songs, I just sit down. I was like, what? What?
Oh,
But it was the same kind of person that was saying we need to do them for other people. And for me, it's the Philippians 2 mindset. Consider one another, more than yourselves. Have the
yeah.
same mind as Christ had, which is in my hope is that when we sing something that's older, maybe less relevant to the younger people, they're excited for the older people to connect to something, for them. So they're excited for them as they participate. And then, when we sing something newer that the older people they're singing too, but they're real excited that, oh, I know this is not my cup of tea, maybe, but man, I know that younger people are really engaging in this and enjoy it. And so just that heart of humility and desire to see
Yes.
everybody there and not just come for, oh, that's my favorite thing, or
Yeah.
oh, I love
Well,
it.
when I was doing classroom instruction, uh, I taught a class of music appreciation, and we always come up to the hymns, make our way to the hymns eventually, and you could see the kids starting to shut down. They're like early high school, late middle school kids shut down hymns because these hymns mean nothing to them. But then I would tell them the story. I said there was an attorney in Chicago who lost everything in the Chicago fire, and he lost a son to influenza. and he was invited to go to England. And he sent his wife and children on ahead of him. He was going to meet them there. Then all of a sudden, he gets a wire from his wife saying, "All is lost. I alone have survived. Please come." He goes over to England, and only the ship had sank, and only his wife had survived. And he says, I said, while he was on his way over, in the middle of his grief, he writes, "It is well with my soul." Now read those words. You're that lawyer. He's lost everybody but his wife. All his children are gone. He's lost his entire life savings. And he writes this song, "When peace like a river attendeth my way." And I said, now does that song mean something? And they inevitably, every one of them would just like, we would have church right at that moment. I said, "Amazing Grace." Boring old song, right? One kid even had the nerve to say, "Yeah." I said, "Okay, you're a slave trader, and you've got a boatload of slaves, and you're coming across the Atlantic, and you're in the middle of a fearsome storm that's threatening to sink your ship. You're getting ready to lose your life. And all of a sudden you realize that the screams that you're hearing from underneath the floorboards of that ship are not the screams of animals. They're the screams of human beings." And that he realized he had been trafficking human beings. And then he writes, "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me." He writes that song out of the horror of that moment. Now, does it mean something?
Yeah. Oh yeah. You think
And
about
generally speaking,
Luther.
what's that?
I said you think about like Martin Luther and "The Mighty Fortress is Our
Oh
God."
my
You
gosh,
get to
yes.
that last verse, what is it? Oh, I was just saying it in my head. The part, "the body they may kill, God's truth abideth still." Like he was actually really facing that possibility. "Let goods
Yes.
and kindred go, this mortal life also. The body they may kill, God's truth abideth still. His kingdom is forever." Yeah. So like even that, it's like, oh, that sounds good. It's like, but that was like his life, right? I mean,
Yes.
that song is really like his life. He struggled with sin, fighting against what he felt like strong temptation of the devil, to believe
Mm,
lies, and then to actually stand up for it, and now face persecution to the point where he could be killed, and others,
yes.
friends were being killed, and that's the song. And it's like, man, this is real life. This is what these guys are going through.
And that
And
song launched the Protestant Reformation. To
yeah,
me, that's what when I tell my kids, I said, look, we make a big deal about all these contemporary songs we hear today about the backstory of the songs because that gives the song meaning. There's a backstory to every hymn that was written. And generally speaking, it's something huge, something important. And when I educated them on like those two songs, it's like they walked out of class going, "Okay, maybe there's something here that I need to look at."
yeah. And check this out too. Another good lesson, like on the "Is What With My Soul." So
Mm-hmm.
that guy, what's his name? Um, can't remember his name. Um, he
Hang on a
was
second.
actually, if I'm getting the story right, he was a Presbyterian elder, right?
Right.
Um, and all that story true and amazing, really to connect to. Later in his life, he basically denied the Trinity, started a group of people that got like Jesus was coming back, and they have to go to Israel and wait for him.
Oh,
Yeah, right. So he went nuts, so right. And so that's a story where I think like, for people who will go, um,
Horatio
oh,
Spafford.
yeah,
He went nuts.
yeah, Spaffordites. Yeah, check out the story. It's crazy.
Oh,
It's they called them the Spaffordites.
that breaks my heart.
Yeah, it was yeah, when I first heard it, it was crazy. But that's where like just the reality, it's a sinking reality to me. And I think that we can really narrow ourselves into, oh man, I'm only going to listen to people who are totally true or whatever. It's like God can't use or give us good things out of terrible things, or from people who became terrible or things like that, which is why I'm not very like hardline against, super hardlined against, like, say, Bethel music,
Right.
or the whatever, the one out of Australia, the other,
Hillsong.
yeah, Hillsong.
Yeah.
You know, I don't usually sing their songs because they don't meet my criteria,
Hmm.
but sometimes, like, uh, there is one that we do. I can't, but it's that same idea to go. I'm not going to stop singing it as well with my soul, because all of a sudden the person,
Went off the
went
deep end on
crazy.
it.
Yeah, and
Well, you know what? I'm not sure if I didn't lose all my children, all my wealth, if the stress of that wouldn't make me go just a little bit nuts. What he suffered was huge.
yeah,
And the other thought occurred to me was that uh, like with Hillsong and these other folks, um, at the end of the day, if you can be messed up and still write a great song. You can have poor theology and still write a great song. Um, I've been studying the Mass for the past 10 years just because, no special reason. And I'm convinced that the Roman Catholic Mass is the most concise uh, collection of truth in the Christian world today. The Kyrie, the Gloria, the Credo, the Agnus Dei, the Benedictus, the Sanctus. To me, it is, if you just take the Roman Catholic thing out of it and read those words and listen to the great music that's been written to those words, um, it's powerful and it's life changing. But
yeah,
sometimes we attach too much importance, I think, to the guy who wrote it, realizing, God can use anybody to say something good.
yeah,
Didn't Balaam's donkey talk back to him once,
yeah,
if I remember correctly? So if God can use a donkey, I mean, gosh, he can use someone from Hillsong. He can use someone from these other places. It's
yeah.
we just need to use discernment.
Yeah, and that's the shepherding thing, right? Is there things that we're connecting to, and that's the thing that we concern ourselves with as pastors. Am I doing anything or connecting to things that might lead people towards bad theology, or just really errant, thinking, or anything like that? And so, because everything is so accessible, you know, those kinds of things, because it used to be whatever's in the book,
Mm-hmm.
that's what we had. And and a lot of those songs we don't even know, because like the newest songs in there were the Gaithers, like you said, which is another funny thing to me. Can we sing some more old songs? And I'm like, what? Like a mighty fortress is our God old, or like, you know
He
you
touched me,
know he
or
touched me old, yeah, or
yeah,
Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. There's something about that name, like,
yes,
that's what a lot of people are thinking about. Like, those are old songs, and I'm like, man, those aren't old songs. Like, these are old songs. But yeah, but like, so many of those musicians, and this is one of the interesting things about music history, which, if I'm sure is that the church used to be the one that was setting the tone for music.
yes.
Because they would hire all the big composers. Those They would be composing religious music, and at some point we got we just playing on to something, and music just went
Walk
past
past
us, and
us.
now
Yeah,
now we're always behind what
yes.
other people are doing in innovation and stuff, and just basically copying.
It's like
Um,
today we're discovering the U2 sound that was prevalent back around 2010.
yeah,
It's not
yeah, yeah,
bad.
yeah,
It's just dated.
yeah. Well, it takes time, right? We're slow,
Yeah.
right? We're slow, and again, I think that's the challenge of, and specific to this place, this culture, is that we have decades of cultural change,
Hmm.
especially in music, and people who have lived through that, who are in your church, and people who are 20 years old who are in your church. Like, I try to pick some songs that are repetitive and simple too, like something like, oh, it's just too repetitive or whatever. So we got kids in here. I want them to be able to sing something too.
Yeah.
And if you didn't like repetitive music so much, why do you like Nothing But the Blood of Jesus, which says the same phrase like 7 times every time you sing through it?
Yep.
you know. So it's just people. They have their zone, and that's their comfort. And oftentimes, I've found that that zone is a lot connected to times of spiritual formation, strong spiritual
Hmm.
formation, and so they seem to connect to the music where they were saved to, or that they were growing a lot to and listening more to. So for me, I haven't listened to a ton of Christian music, pop Christian music in the last 20 years, but I could tell you a whole bunch about For Him and Petra and Stephen
Yes.
Curtis Chapman, and because
Amy Grant.
when I was really getting into it, those were the people, and I
Yes.
just was consuming that like crazy, and I've just sort of moved on to other things. But
It's funny, as a guitar teacher, none of my current students are chasing any of the current music that's out there. And there's good stuff out there. But I have a student right now who's learning the guitar solo for Smoke in the Water. I have another student who's learning the guitar solo for Sweet Child of Mine, and or Sweet Home Alabama, or More Than a Feeling. All these great 70s and 80s tunes. And that's what almost all of my guitar students, Mr. Garwood, I didn't really work in this thing last week because I found this new tune, this new group, Creedence Clearwater Revival. Have you heard of them? I said, yeah, I was there when they were new, 1974. But it's, there's just something, I'm encouraged. I think a lot of times when kids say they don't like something, it's just they don't know about it. Like when I started doing the backstories for these songs, these hymns, it's like all of a sudden now the hymns mean something to them. And if they know the story of Martin Luther, uh, that his hymns mean something. And when you know something about the backstory of the Wesley brothers, their hymns begin to mean more, because every one of those hymns was written out of a life that was in service to God, and it was reflecting a period in their life where something special is happening. And it's I'm not totally discouraged. I think our kids got they have some common sense, and I'm encouraged from that. But honestly, I have most of the trouble with the older folks, and that's my crowd. I
yeah,
can't imagine. I'm part of the older folks. I get to park in the senior parking spots now.
yeah. Well, you live in music culture that changes, and so you understand things that others have to learn.
Yeah.
You've learned things that other people already have to learn, and that thing that the appreciation of stuff with younger people, it's the same thing, with older people and middle-aged people and whatever. It's just learning to appreciate the universalness of Christianity.
Yes.
Like the gospel works in every place and every time ever.
Yes.
The way the church is meant to function works at every place, every time ever. The way that we're meant to worship works in every place and every time ever. And
And you brought up something that is a really good point to close on, and it honestly, it's something I'd never thought about. The fact that we professional musicians, if you're a professional musician, you have to change with the times. I remember back in the '70s, I was playing show band. There was like Tower of Power, Blood, Sweat, and Tears, Chicago. Horn bands were the big deal. And then all of a sudden, like the fusion bands, like Return to Forever, Stanley Clarke, all these folks. And then you had, of course, then you had the Creedence Clearwaters, the Boston, and we had to learn all these songs as we went along, and we had to embrace new gear, new technology, new styles. Eddie Van Halen came around and screwed everybody up with that stupid tapping nonsense. Now all of a sudden we have to tap too. Are you out of your mind? Who thought of that? And so it's yeah. So that makes us a little bit more hypersensitive to change, and folks who aren't involved in music kind of slower to come around because honestly they haven't dealt with it as at an intimate level like you and I have. Maybe that's it.
and you want to use it, right? I mean, you love the Lord, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you have this wealth of musical background, and you want to use all of that for Him. It's not
Yes.
like it's like, well, this set of style of music will be for the Lord, and this style of music will just be for me for fun. You
Yeah.
know, when you really are grown in the Lord, you want to give it all to Him,
Yes.
and I think that's one reason why music started changing a lot. Musicians started getting saved who only knew what they knew, and so they just started writing what they knew.
And
They're
they
doing
brought what they
do.
knew into the church. I remember back in the
Yeah.
Jesus Revolution with, oh gosh, who was the rock and roller? Larry Norman.
Yeah.
He wrote the song,
The
"He's
state
an
I cut my
unidentified
hair.
flying object. You'll
Oh,
see him in the air. He's an unidentified flying object. You'll drop your hands and stare." And people absolutely went bananas, good and bad, over that
did
stuff.
he
And
do
then,
Why Should the Devil Have All the Good Music? Did he do that one?
yes. And then
Yes.
you had groups like Stryper.
Excellent. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, you want to talk about edgy?
Yeah.
And there were actually some churches that did Stryper tunes in them. So that had to be. I kind of would wanted to been a fly on the wall to see that happen.
There's edgy. I think that's a good definition of edgy.
Yes. well, my friend, it has been awesome to meet you and get to know you. We need to do this again.
It's fun.
I would like to. I have 3 podcasts that I do currently. One is my Bible podcast. This one, for the only one that matters. Oh, by the way, this one was almost called for an audience of one, and I thought that was a really cool title till I found out about 8,000 other people had podcasts called For an Audience of One. So I'm not nearly as original as I thought. So no podcast is called this. But then I have a third podcast coming up. It's called The Emerging Composer, where it's more music centric. And I would like, I meet with professional musicians and talk about various things musical. I'm in the process of writing a guitar book, for instance, to take guitar players through the Cage system. And I just finished a series of podcasts on the circle of fifths and how to use it and how it works in pop music. And so that's my bent. That's the direction I'm going. And so I would love to sit down with you sometime and just talk music theory nerdery. I have to run. Thank you so much for your time, brother. I appreciate it. And it was fun getting to know you. I learned a lot tonight. Thank you.
Yeah, you too, Paige.
See you later. Bye-bye.
Hey, bro.
Much thanks to Shaun for giving me of his time. Folks, I just want to remind you that for those of us believers who are in the fine arts community, we ultimately perform for the only one that matters.